The Nethkai hit the starboard vigil like a hammer hitting glass. 3 raider ships latched onto the hull simultaneously. Port, starboard, and ventral. The sound of their boarding clamps biting into metal echoed through the corridors like bones cracking. Within 30 seconds, the first breacher pods punched through, and the Nethkai poured in. Ethan had read the files on the Nethkai. He had studied the pictures, the autopsy reports, the combat footage. None of it came close to the reality. They were wrong. That was the only word his brain could find. They moved wrong, shaped wrong, sounded wrong. They were hunched, eyeless things covered in dark chitinous plates that glistened with moisture. Their mouths split open in 4 directions, lined with teeth that curved inward like hooks. They did not speak. They did not roar. They clicked, a fast, wet, rhythmic clicking that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And they were fast. The first wave hit the port corridor, and 2 human Marines went down before anyone could fire a shot. Ethan heard it over the comm. The sudden burst of gunfire, then screaming, then silence, then more gunfire. He set up triage in the med bay and waited. He did not have to wait long. The wounded came in waves. First the humans. Cuts, puncture wounds, broken bones. 1 Marine with a Nethkai claw embedded in his shoulder. Ethan worked fast, his hand steady, his voice calm. He pulled the claw free, sealed the wound, pumped the Marine full of antibiotics, and sent him back out. Then the Velhari started coming in. The first was a courtier with a gash across 2 of his arms. He looked at Ethan with open disgust, and refused treatment until Ethan simply started working, without asking permission. The Velhari's blood was silver blue and thicker than human blood. It clotted differently, layering in sheets rather than forming scabs. Ethan adapted. He had studied the Velhari medical files on the trip out, not because anyone asked him to, but because he was the kind of medic who could not sleep without knowing how to save every living thing within 100 meters of his bed. The battle raged for 40 minutes. Human Marines and Velhari warriors fought side by side in the corridors, and despite the tension of the past days, they fought well together. The humans were faster, more adaptive, better at improvising in tight spaces. The Velhari were stronger, harder to kill, and their 4 arms made them devastating in close quarters. A Velhari warrior with a blade in each hand was a nightmare that the Nethkai had no answer for. But the Nethkai had numbers, and they had no fear. The worst breach came at the 30-minute mark. A Nethkai team punched through near the royal quarters. Kethron met them at the door with 6 of his guards, and what followed was a slaughter in both directions. The Velhari guards cut down dozens, but the Nethkai kept coming, climbing over their own dead. Ethan heard it happen over the comm, a sound like metal tearing, then Kethron's voice, raw and desperate, shouting in Velhari. Then a human translation came through, flat and mechanical. The Queen is wounded. Repeat, the Queen is wounded. Ethan's hands stopped moving. The Marine on his table looked up at him. Doc? Hold this against the wound. Press hard. Do not move. Ethan was already turning to the door. Nora appeared seconds later, her face tight. They are bringing her. Kethron is carrying her. The Velhari shuttle bay, their medical alcove. In vacuum. The ventral breach took it out. Then she comes here. Kethron will not allow it. Kethron does not get a vote. The argument became irrelevant 3 minutes later, when Kethron came through the medbay door, carrying Queen Sivana in his upper arms like she weighed nothing. His carapace was cracked in 6 places. Silver-blue blood ran down his legs. His eyes were wild, with something Ethan had seen 1,000 times in 1,000 species. The look of a protector who had failed. He laid the Queen on Ethan's operating table, and Ethan saw the wound. A Nethkai blade had slashed across her lower left thorax, the exact area Ethan had noticed the day before. The new cut was deep and ugly, but that was not the worst of it. The impact had torn open something beneath, an older wound, poorly healed, now ripped apart and bleeding freely. The silver-blue blood was pooling fast, and there was a smell beneath it, faint and sour, that told Ethan the old wound was infected. Badly. Kethron grabbed Ethan's wrist. His grit could have crushed bone. No human touches the Queen. Ethan looked up at him. Then she dies in the next 20 minutes. Your choice. Kethron's grip tightened. His mandibles clicked in fury. Behind him, his surviving guards raised their blades. Then from the table, a voice, weak, broken, but carrying the weight of a crown. Kethron, release him. The guard captain looked down at his queen. Something cracked in his expression that had nothing to do with his carapace. Release him. That is my command. Kethron released Ethan's wrist. He stepped back. He did not lower his gaze from Ethan for a single second. Ethan turned to the Queen. Her compound eyes were dim, flickering. Her breathing was shallow and wrong, a wet, rattling sound that meant fluid where fluid should not be. He had tools designed for human bodies. He had training built on human anatomy. He had textbook knowledge of Velhari biology that was 6 months old and probably incomplete. And he had 20 minutes. Ethan Cole picked up his instruments and got to work. The wound was worse than it looked, and it already looked terrible. Ethan worked fast but carefully, peeling back the torn carapace plating around the Queen's lower thorax. The new slash from the Nethkai blade had cut deep, but the real danger was what it had exposed, an older fracture in the carapace, maybe months old, that had healed wrong. Beneath the fracture, the tissue was swollen and dark with infection. A slow-acting pathogen had been eating away at her from the inside, hidden under that beautiful iridescent armor, like rot beneath fresh paint. She had been hiding this for a long time. Ethan adjusted his scanner, recalibrated it for Velhari tissue density, and mapped the infection. It had spread into the connective tissue between the carapace plates, dangerously close to a cluster of neural fibers that his textbooks called the secondary thoracic plexus. He did not fully understand what that cluster did, but the files had flagged it as critical. Damage there could be fatal. He reached for a microscalpel to begin removing the dead tissue, and then the Queen woke up. It was not a gentle waking. Sivana's eyes flared bright, all of them, the compound clusters and the smaller sensory nodes along her temples, and her forearms shot out and gripped the edges of the operating table. The metal groaned and bent under her fingers. Her body went rigid, every plate of carapace locking into place, like armor snapping shut. Everyone in the medbay froze. Nora's hand went to her sidearm. Kethron surged forward. The 2 Velhari guards raised their blades. But Sivana was not looking at any of them. She was looking at Ethan. Her eyes were locked on his hands, his small, soft human hands, hovering centimeters above the most sacred part of her body. When she spoke, her voice was low and raw, carrying a weight that went far beyond pain. No one but my mate may touch me here. The words hit the room like a pressure wave. Even the hum of the ship's engines seemed to go quiet. Ethan did not move. He did not pull his hands back. He did not look away. He had treated patients in shock before. Patients who woke up mid-surgery. Patients who were confused, terrified, violent. He had been punched, kicked, bitten, and once stabbed by a Marine who did not realize the battle was over. The first rule was always the same. Do not flinch. I understand, Ethan said. His voice was quiet and steady. I understand what this area means to your people, Your Majesty. And I am sorry that I am the one standing here instead of someone you chose. But the infection in your thorax has reached your secondary neural cluster. If I stop now, You will be dead before the hour ends. And I am not going to let that happen. Sivana's grip on the table did not loosen. Her breathing was fast and ragged. Behind her eyes, Ethan could see a war. Pride against survival. Tradition against necessity. The queen against the woman who was afraid. You are not Velhari, she said. You do not know what you are asking me to allow. Then tell me, Ethan said. He set the scalpel down. Not away, just down, within reach, where she could see it. A gesture of patience, not surrender. Tell me what I need to know, so I can do this right. Something shifted in her expression. It was small, a fractional relaxation of the plates around her eyes, a slight loosening of her lower mandibles. Surprise, maybe. No one had asked her that before. No one had treated this as something that required her guidance rather than just her compliance. She was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the distant echo of gunfire as the last Nethkai were being driven from the ship. Then she spoke. The lower thorax of a Velhari was not simply a body part. It housed the secondary neural plexus, a cluster of nerve tissue that processed emotion, memory, and the deep biological bonds that connected mates for life. To touch it was to touch the most intimate part of a Velhari's self. It was where pair bonds were formed, where a mate's presence was felt even across the void of space. It was, in the most literal sense, where a Velhari kept their heart. Not the organ that pumped blood, but the place where they felt love. No one touched it, ever. Not doctors, not family, not priests. Only a mate, chosen and bonded through a ritual older than the Dominion itself. For a stranger to touch it was not just a violation, it was an erasure. It said that the sacred space meant nothing, that the bond meant nothing. For the queen of the Velhari Dominion to allow an alien to touch it would be a scandal that could end her reign. Ethan listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not minimize. When she finished, he nodded. I hear you, he said, and I am asking your permission, not as a human, not as a stranger, as your medic. I will explain every step before I take it. I will not touch anything I do not need to touch. And when this is over, I will never speak of what I saw, unless you ask me to. Sivana stared at him. The war behind her eyes was still raging, but something new had entered it. A fragile, cautious thing that looked almost like trust. You would let me guide you, she said. It was not quite a question. This is your body, your majesty. I am just the one holding the tools. Another silence. Kethrun stood behind Ethan like a mountain of rage and grief, every muscle coiled, waiting for the queen's word. Sivana closed her eyes. When she opened them, the war was over. Then you may proceed, Ethan Cole, and you will be gentle. Yes, ma'am. He picked up the scalpel. He told her exactly what he was going to do. He asked before every incision, every probe, every adjustment. He worked slowly where he could, and quickly where he had to, and through it all, he talked to her. Not medical jargon, not empty reassurance, but real, steady human conversation. He told her about the first patient he ever lost, a young private on a colony world, whose name he still said in his prayers. He told her about Nora, and how she once punched a general for sending wounded men back to the front. He told her about Earth, about rain and oceans, and the way sunlight looked through autumn leaves. He talked to her because she was scared and in pain, and alone, in a way that no queen should ever have to be. And because talking was the only way he knew to say, I see you. Not the crown, not the carapace, you. Sivana listened. Her grip on the table slowly loosened. At some point, one of her lower hands moved, not to stop him, but to rest near his arm. Not touching, just close. Kethrun watched everything. His blade was still in his hand, but somewhere during the surgery, he lowered it to his side, and he did not raise it again. The procedure took 97 minutes. Ethan removed the infected tissue, cleaned the old fracture, sealed the new wound with a combination of human surgical adhesive and Velhari bioresin that he mixed on the spot because no one had ever needed to combine them before. He repaired the damage to the neural cluster with hands that did not shake once, even though they wanted to. When it was done, he stepped back. His gloves were soaked in silver-blue blood. His back ached. His hands were trembling now that he was letting them. Sivana lay still on the table, breathing slowly, her carapace dim but steady. She turned her head and looked at Ethan with eyes that held something he had never seen in a Velhari before. "You have touched what no one was meant to touch," she said softly, "and you did so with more care than I believed your kind capable of." She paused, and her voice dropped to something almost private. "I will remember this, Ethan Cole. For all the years I have left, I will remember this." Ethan peeled off his gloves and dropped them in the disposal bin. His throat was tight, but his voice held. "Get some rest, Your Majesty. I will check on you in an hour." He turned and walked out of the medbay on legs that felt like water. Nora was waiting in the corridor. She did not say anything. She just handed him a cup of coffee and stood beside him while he drank it with shaking hands. In the medbay, Kethrun had not moved. He stood over his queen, watching her breathe, and for the first time in his long life, he thought about what it meant that the softest hands on the ship had just done the bravest thing he had ever seen. The news spread through the Velhari delegation like fire through dry wood. A human had touched the queen's lower thorax. A human had seen what only a mate should see. A human had put his hands on the sacred place, and the queen had allowed it. By morning, the Starward Vigil was a ship at war with itself, not against the Nethkai, who had been driven off and destroyed, but against the thing that is always harder to fight than an enemy, an idea. The Velhari courtiers split into two camps within hours. The first, led by a senior advisor named Drathvin, called the surgery a desecration. Drathvin was old, traditional, and powerful. He had served 3 queens before Sivana, and he spoke with the weight of centuries when he stood before the delegation and said that the queen had been compromised, that the human medic had violated her, that allowing this to stand without consequence would weaken the throne itself. The second camp was smaller, but growing. These were the warriors, the ones who had fought beside the humans in the corridors, who had seen human marines throw themselves into Nethkai claws to cover a wounded Velhari soldier's retreat. They had watched their queen nearly die, and they had watched a small human with soft hands save her life. They did not care about tradition at that moment. They cared that their queen was breathing. Kethrun stood between the two camps and said nothing. His silence was louder than any argument. Ethan stayed in the medbay and tried to ignore all of it. He checked on Sivana every 2 hours, monitoring her recovery with a combination of human diagnostics and Velhari scanning tools he had figured out how to use through trial and error. Her healing was remarkable. Velhari biology was built for resilience, and the infection was retreating fast now that the dead tissue was gone. She would be on her feet within days. But she watched him. Every time he entered, her eyes tracked him with that same expression he had seen on the operating table. Not gratitude exactly, but something deeper. Recognition. As if he had shown her something about the universe she had not expected to find. On the second day after the surgery, Kethrun came to the medbay alone. Ethan was cleaning instruments when the shadow fell across his workstation. He looked up and found the guard captain standing in the doorway, filling it completely. Kethrun's carapace had been patched, rough field repairs over the 6 cracks he had taken during the battle. He looked like a wall that had survived a siege. "Medic," Kethrun said. His voice was deep and flat. "Captain," Ethan replied. He kept cleaning. He had learned a long time ago that the best way to handle dangerous people was to keep doing your job and let them come to you. Kethron was silent for a long moment. Then he asked a question that Ethan did not expect. "Were you not afraid?" Ethan stopped cleaning. He set the instrument down and looked at Kethron properly. Not at the armor, not at the scars, but at the eyes beneath. They were tired, old, carrying something heavy. "I was terrified," Ethan said honestly. "But not of you, not of her. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid my hands would not be good enough, that my knowledge would not be deep enough, that I would make a mistake, and she would die on my table. That is the fear I carry every time, with every patient." Kethron studied him for a long time. Then he did something that made Nora, watching from the corridor, hold her breath. He gave Ethan a single slow nod. In Velhari body language, it was the acknowledgement of an equal. Not a friend, not an ally. An equal, someone whose courage had been weighed and found sufficient. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Nora let out her breath. "Do you know what he just did?" she asked. He nodded at me. That was not a nod. That was a Velhari warrior telling another warrior that he respects him. He has probably done that 3 times in his entire life. Ethan picked up his instrument and went back to cleaning. "I am not a warrior. Tell that to him." On the 3rd day, Sivana summoned Ambassador Grant. The human diplomat arrived, expecting difficult questions about the surgery and its political consequences. What he got instead left him speechless. Sivana, standing under her own power for the first time since the attack, did not simply agree to the Mutual Defense Pact. She proposed a full integration program. Human medics embedded in Velhari fleets, joint training exercises, shared technology, and a permanent diplomatic exchange. Grant stammered through his acceptance. This was beyond anything the Admiralty had hoped for. "Your people have something mine lack," Sivana said to him, and her voice carried the authority of a queen who had made a decision that could not be unmade. "You see wounds that we did not know we had, and you heal them without being asked." The talks resumed with new energy. Details were hammered out. Protocols were drafted. For the first time in the history of both species, something that looked like real partnership was taking shape. Ethan watched none of it. He was in his medbay, checking the Queen's latest blood work. And that was when he found it. The numbers were wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not the kind of wrong that set off alarms, but wrong in a quiet, careful way that spoke of intention rather than accident. There was a compound in her blood that should not be there. It was Velhari in origin, masked by her natural biochemistry, designed to be invisible to standard scans. Ethan only caught it because he had been running her blood through human diagnostic filters as well, cross-referencing everything, looking for any sign of complications. The compound was a toxin, slow-acting, cumulative, designed to mimic natural organ failure over a period of weeks. Someone on this ship was poisoning the Queen. Ethan stared at the results. His hands, which had not shaken during 97 minutes of surgery on an alien queen, began to tremble. He locked the medbay door and called Nora. Nora arrived in 40 seconds. Grant arrived in 3 minutes. They stood in the locked medbay while Ethan showed them the blood work, and the color drained from both their faces. "You are certain," Grant said. "It was not really a question. The compound is Velhari. It is organic, slow release, and it has been in her system for at least a week, probably longer. Someone started dosing her before she even came aboard this ship, and they have continued since. If the Queen dies, and it looks natural," Nora said slowly, "the Alliance dies with her, and if it happens on a human ship, we get blamed." Grant ran his hands over his face. "Who has access to her food and water? Her personal retinue, her courtiers, her guards. Ethan paused. Kethrun. Nora looked at him. You think it is Kethrun? No. Ethan said it without hesitation. I watched that man carry his queen through a corridor full of Nefkai bodies. I watched him stand over her while I operated, ready to kill me if I made a single wrong move. That is not a man who poisons. That is a man who would die first. Then who? Ethan did not have an answer, but he had a plan. He continued treating Sivana as normal, visiting her every 2 hours, checking her vitals, adjusting her medication. But now he was also quietly flushing the toxin from her system, using a counteragent he synthesized from her own blood chemistry. He kept the symptoms visible, just enough to make the poisoner believe the toxin was still working, just enough to make them confident. Meanwhile, Nora ran a quiet investigation. She and Grant identified every Velhari who had access to the Queen's food supply, and tracked their movements through the ship's internal sensors. The list was short: 4 courtiers and 2 guards. They fed each suspect a different piece of false information about the Queen's condition. One was told she was improving. Another was told her organs were beginning to fail. Another was told she had been moved to a different section of the ship. They waited. On the 5th night after the surgery, Drathvin made his move. The old courtier was careful. He waited until the corridor was empty, until the guards had rotated, until the ship's lights had dimmed for the night cycle. He carried a small vial of concentrated toxin, enough to finish the job in hours rather than weeks. He moved through the ship with the quiet confidence of someone who had been planning this for a very long time. He reached the Queen's temporary quarters and entered the food preparation alcove. He opened the vial. Kethrun's hand closed around his wrist like a vice made of stone. Drathvin did not struggle. He did not deny it. He looked up at the guard captain with eyes that held no shame, only conviction. She has betrayed us, he said. She let a human touch her. She has given our fleet to animals. I am saving the Dominion. Kethrun said nothing. His grip tightened until the vial cracked, and the toxin ran harmlessly down Drathvin's arm. Then, with the other 3 hands, he drew his blade and performed the ancient rite of a guard captain who has found a traitor in the court. It was quick. Kethrun was many things, but he was not cruel. Nora arrived 30 seconds later with a security team. She found Kethrun standing over the body, his blade still in his hand, his face unreadable. He looked at her and said simply, "It is done. The Queen is safe." Nora holstered her weapon and nodded. "We know. The medic found the poison 3 days ago." Something moved in Kethrun's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something close to it. "The medic," he repeated. "The medic." Kethrun looked down at his blade, then back at Nora. "Your species is strange," he said. "You are soft and small, and you break easily. But you see things that we do not. And you do not stop," Nora said. "No, we do not." The signing ceremony took place the next morning in the main conference chamber. Both delegations stood together, humans on one side, Velhari on the other, and for the first time, the gap between them felt like a bridge rather than a wall. Sivana stood at the center, fully healed, her carapace gleaming, her forearms arranged in the posture of absolute authority. She spoke to both species, and her voice filled the room. She spoke of the attack and the battle. She spoke of the wound and the surgery. She spoke of a human medic who had been asked to do the impossible, and had done it with steady hands and a gentle voice. She spoke of what it meant, that he had asked permission before every cut, that he had treated her body as sacred, even when he did not share her beliefs, that he had given her dignity when she was at her most vulnerable. "I have learned something aboard this ship," she said. "Strength is not only found in armor and blades. It is found in the hands that refuse to let someone die, even when every barrier says to walk away. It is found in the voice that says, 'I see you,' when the world says you are alone." She turned to Ethan, who was standing near the back of the room, trying very hard to be invisible. Ethan Cole, step forward. He did, reluctantly, feeling every eye on him. Sivana placed her upper right hand over her lower thorax, the sacred place, and extended her lower left hand toward him, palm open. The Velhari delegation drew a collective breath. I grant you its scene, she said, the bond of life debt, which transcends caste and species and time. You are written into my story now, healer, and my story is long. Ethan did not know the protocol. He did not know the correct response. He looked at Kethron, who stood behind the queen, and the guard captain gave him the smallest nod, the same nod as before, an equal. Ethan looked back at the queen, and did the only thing that felt right. He placed his hand over his own heart, and bowed his head. Thank you, your majesty. I will do my best to be worthy of it. Sivana's mandibles moved, in what Ethan had come to recognize as the Velhari equivalent of a smile. You already are. Behind her, Kethron placed his fist over his chest, the Velhari salute, and held it. One by one, the other Velhari warriors did the same. The sound of fists striking carapace filled the chamber like thunder. Nora, standing at the edge of the room, wiped her eyes and pretended she was not. Grant signed the alliance. Both sides applauded, humans with their hands, Velhari with the rhythmic striking of their lower arms against their thorax plates. The sound blended together into something new, something that had never existed before. The Starward Vigil resumed its course 2 days later. The delegations departed to their respective homeworlds, carrying the signed accords, and the beginning of something that neither species fully understood yet, but both could feel. 3 months later, the first human medics deployed to Velhari warships. Velhari warriors began joint training with human marines. A cultural exchange program was established, and a young Velhari scholar published the first interspecies medical text, co-authored with a human doctor from the colony world of New Savannah. And in a medbay on a ship whose name was already becoming legend, Ethan Cole sat alone, restocking supplies, when his console chimed with an incoming message. He opened it. It was from the Queen. I trust you remember your promise to tend the wound if it opens again. I will hold you to it, healer. Do not make me come find you. Ethan read it twice. He almost smiled. Then he closed the message, picked up a roll of bandages, and went back to doing the only thing he had ever been good at, making sure that the people around him, no matter how strange or proud or alien, stayed alive long enough to see tomorrow. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched on forever, and somewhere among them, a bond had been made that would hold for a very long time. Ethan Cole did not belong here. He knew it the moment he stepped aboard the Starward Vigil 6 days ago. And he knew it even more now as he shoved medical supplies into a cabinet that was not built for human hands. The cabinet was Velhari design, smooth, curved, grown from some kind of living resin that pulsed faintly with warmth. It made his skin crawl every time he touched it. You are going to break that door off, Nora Bishop said from the entrance of the medbay. She leaned against the frame, with her arms crossed, and a look on her face that said she had been watching him struggle for at least a full minute before speaking. It does not latch properly, Ethan muttered. He gave the cabinet one final push, and it clicked shut. The resin pulsed once, as if offended. It is organic architecture. You are supposed to press gently and let it seal on its own. I am a medic, Nora, not a botanist. Nora smiled, but it faded quickly. She glanced down the corridor behind her, then stepped inside and lowered her voice. They are docking in 20 minutes. The Queen and her full retinue. Kethron is with her. Ethan had read the briefing files on Kethron, captain of the Royal Guard, 7 feet tall, 4 arms, a combat record that stretched back further than most human family trees. The file had included a note from intelligence that simply read, "Do not provoke." Wonderful, Ethan said. and I am here restocking bandages. You are here because the Admiralty wanted a combat medic on board in case things go sideways. Be grateful it is boring. Boring means no one is bleeding." She was right, and Ethan knew it. But he was a field medic. He had spent 6 years stitching soldiers back together on colony worlds where the air tasted like copper and the ground shook from orbital strikes. He was not built for diplomatic cruises. The docking alarm sounded 20 minutes later, and Ethan found himself standing in the corridor with the rest of the crew as the Velhari delegation came aboard. He had seen pictures. Pictures did not prepare him. Queen Sivana Ithrael walked at the center of her retinue like a blade carried between shields. She was tall, taller than any human woman Ethan had ever seen, and her body was covered in carapace plating that caught the ship's lights and threw back colors that did not have names in English. Her 4 arms were folded in a precise arrangement that the briefing file said indicated formal authority. Her compound eyes moved across the human crew with the calm, cold interest of someone examining insects. Behind her walked Kethron, and he was everything the file promised. He towered over the queen by a full head. His carapace was darker, thicker, scarred in dozens of places. His eyes swept the corridor like targeting sensors, and when they passed over Ethan, they lingered for exactly 1 second longer than felt comfortable. Ambassador Philip Grant stepped forward and delivered the welcome address he had probably rehearsed 100 times. He was good at his job. Calm, measured, respectful of Velhari customs. He bowed at the correct angle. He used the correct form of address. He did everything right. Sivana acknowledged him with a single nod that somehow managed to convey both acceptance and complete indifference at the same time. Then she and her retinue moved past. As the queen walked by the medbay corridor, Ethan watched her. It was habit. 6 years of triage had trained his eyes to read bodies the way other people read faces. Gait, posture, weight distribution, they told stories that mouths never would. Sivana's story had a chapter she was hiding. Her left side was off. It was subtle, so subtle that no one without medical training would catch it. But the way she carried her lower left arm, the micro-adjustments in her stride, the faintest tension in the carapace plating around her lower thorax, something was wrong there. Something old. "Nora," he said quietly. "No. I did not say anything yet. You had your medic face on. Whatever you saw, it is not our business. She has her own doctors." Ethan let it go. Nora was right. It was not his patient, not his species, not his problem. The alliance talks began that afternoon in the ship's main conference chamber. Ethan was not invited, but Nora gave him updates during their evening meal. The talks were tense. The Velhari found human customs confusing and mildly offensive. The humans found Velhari caste protocols exhausting and rigid. Both sides wanted the alliance for the same reason. The Nethkai swarm was getting bolder, hitting colonies on both borders. But wanting the same thing and agreeing on how to get it were very different matters. "Grant is holding it together," Nora said, pushing food around her plate. But Kethron made a comment about human skin being too thin for real combat, and Lieutenant Morris almost threw a chair. "Morris has anger issues. Morris has pride issues. So do the Velhari. That is the problem. 2 proud species trying to admit they need each other without actually saying the words." Ethan thought about the Queen's hidden wound. Pride was a kind of armor, and sometimes the cracks only showed when you knew where to look. He went to bed that night with a feeling he had learned to trust over 6 years of war. The quiet, electric hum in his gut that said something was coming. At 0300 hours, the proximity alarm tore through the ship like a scream. Ethan was on his feet before he was fully awake. His hands were already reaching for his med kit by the time Nora's voice came over the comm, sharp and steady and stripped of all warmth. All hands, battle stations. 3 Nethkai raiders on intercept course. Boarding action is imminent. This is not a drill. Ethan grabbed his kit, sealed his boots, and ran. The fragile peace was over. Whatever came next would be written in blood, and Ethan Cole was the man who would have to clean it up.